friends! This week I want to introduce the first installment of a new series I'll be doing. The idea behind this series will be exploring a particular era much more in depth, rather than just sort of doing individual projects. So in case you couldn't tell from this kind of crazy, kind of lovely hairstyle, I will be starting with the Regency era. And I want to start just by giving a quick introduction, hopefully quick, to what the Regency era was, what defined it, as well as just an overview of the prevalent trends of that time. The Regency era is named for the period when George IV of England ruled as Prince Regent when his father, King George III, was declared unfit to rule due to illness. George III had recurrent and eventually permanent mental illness, as well as the possibility that he had a blood disorder called porphyria, and it's unclear which of these made him unfit to rule. But regardless, George IV began his rule as Prince Regent in 1810. More broadly, the fashions, architecture, culture, and political trends associated with the Regency era began earlier in 1789, following the French Revolution and the First Napoleonic Empire. And these trends lasted until Queen Victoria started to rise to power. And although Regency trends were common across most of Europe and the British colonies, some countries did buck these trends, such as Spain, where inspiration came from traditional Spanish styles as a mark of Spanish pride. But in general, what were these Regency trends? In terms of dress, the classical trends of ancient Greece and Rome were hugely inspirational in terms of the silhouette and just generally how the garments were constructed. In general, there was a simplification in fashion, probably as a rejection of the sort of over-the-top and highly constructed court styles of France. And the dresses that were worn were meant to be reminiscent of the draped togas seen especially in statues. And these togas, or dresses, whichever you'd like to call them, were somewhat loose-fitting and were belted just under the bosom, which really inspired the sort of traditional Regency silhouette of a waistline just under the bust and then loose flowing skirts underneath that. And this waistline was called the Empire waistline, which is named after the First Napoleonic Empire, and it was made popular by Josephine Bonaparte, Napoleon Bonaparte's wife. White or light-colored fabrics were incredibly popular, and this was for several reasons. The first was that the Etruscan statues of Greek and Roman origin were white at this point, and at that time they didn't know that when these statues were originally made, they were very brightly painted, because the paint had worn away and they didn't have the technology to analyze them more in depth. But also, there was a new emphasis on hygiene during the Regency era, and these light fabrics could be washed a lot more frequently than the heavier brocades and cottons and silks of the Georgian era. Hairstyles were also heavily inspired by Greek and Roman statues, and in general were meant to look simpler and less constructed and more natural than previous eras. Curls were incredibly popular, and they used curling tongs to achieve this, and also different methods using paper to wrap the hair and then pressing it with irons and things, and just trying to get loose, fluffy curls and sort of loose, fluffy bun hairstyles. Braids could also be used to sort of frame the face, and also sort of iconic for this era are these short curly bangs that I've kind of tried to mimic here, but I don't have Regency style bangs, so I'm not sure how well that worked. But in general, both hair and dress were meant to look more natural and less over the top than the styles seen just prior to this. Although the completely simplistic styles didn't last for the whole period, and toward the end of the Regency era, you did begin to see heavily trimmed gowns and a lot more decoration, particularly at the neckline and the hem. In terms of entertainment during this era, dancing was very popular, especially during what's sometimes called the season, which is the summer months where courting was traditionally done, or when courting was traditionally done. Because dancing gave a rare opportunity for men and women to talk in semi-privacy as they were dancing together. And especially country dances of England were very popular, and these are very reminiscent of square dancing. If you have ever done that, these are sort of pattern dances that are danced not just with two people, but often four. For middle and upper class ladies, artistic and musical pursuits were very common for entertainment, but also they were considered very important in making a match for marriage. A lady's accomplishments would help her to secure a husband. And also card playing was very popular in this period. Whist was played by both men and women, and card games involving gambling were especially popular with upper class gentlemen. And also with gentlemen, hunting and fishing was very popular. Now, as far as food, it was during this period that sandwiches were invented, but not the sort of sandwiches that we know today. They were delicate triangular sandwiches like you'd imagine at a tea party. And these sandwiches were often served in the afternoon along with cakes and fruit. Cake in general was extremely popular in this time, sweet food, and cake was sometimes even served for breakfast. Now, for the upper classes, dinner was very extravagant, particularly if they were having important guests over, and could consist of as many as 10 courses. So imagine sitting for dinner and you get 10 different courses, and how long that would take and how much conversation would happen. And in broad strokes in general, the Regency era was one of huge changes across the board, including revolutions, the beginning of industrialization, and sort of this neoclassical revival in terms of style and fashion and intellectual pursuits. And I think that's about all I have, and gives enough context to sort of look at the foods and hair care and fashions of the Regency era over the next several weeks. So I hope this introduction was informative, and that you'll join me next week when we begin to explore the Regency era, starting with food. So I'm very excited. I hope you guys are excited. If you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe if you want to see the rest of this series. See you next time.